I'm stoked. I think my
Yes.
favorite part about this, as we just kick this discussion off, cornerbacks and safeties are the two positions that I believe ultimately drove the Chiefs to the success that they obviously saw this season in winning a Super Bowl. With what we saw from guys like Trent McDuffie, L'Jarius Sneed, and the rest of their defensive backs was stuff that the rest of the league really isn't investing a lot into, though I think it's reaping crazy returns. And even crazier, Nick, is the part where these guys are the guys you see the least on the screen because they're the
Exactly.
first guys to leave the broadcast angle.
Yeah.
They're the last guys to get back in it. And when the quarterback finally sees a busted coverage, oh, well, finally you see the DB and he's 5 yards off the wide receiver. So it makes for such a fun position because you really have to know your stuff as you dig into this. And if
Yeah.
you can find some of these diamonds in the rough, man, they are team changing.
Exactly. I mean, I know a lot of Bears fans when Ryan Poles came over from the Chiefs, that first draft, he took back-to-back defensive backs, and people were scratching their heads saying, where's the offense? Where are the skill players for Justin Fields? And right away, Kyler Gordon, Jaquan Brisker both have grown into stalwarts on the defense. So you can see how they've taken something that I think a lot of the league is catching on to now, and they've turned it into something that's been a back end of the defense that's a strength for this Bears unit going forward.
I completely agree, Nick. And talk me through that, right? You just mentioned two picks, but the Bears have a lot more invested in this secondary than just two second round picks from what, 2 years ago?
They
How do
do.
you feel about the Bears cornerbacking situation right now?
I really like it. I mean, I know we're talking cornerback, so people are going to say, well, they're not going to invest any heavy capital in the cornerback position, and I tend to agree, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about them. I do. It starts with Jalen Johnson. He was an old Ryan Pace draft pick, second round out of Utah, and he's grown into a shutdown top end cornerback in
Mhm.
the league. Barring something unfathomable happening where he's not on the roster, he's going to be on the team next year, whether it's a franchise tag or long-term extension. Opposite him, you've got Tyreek Stevenson, another second-round pick who was blossoming into a great cornerback last year. You've got Jaquan Brisker, Kyler Gordon, who in this new age, 11 personnel, Sean McVay driven offenses, you need a slot corner like Kyler Gordon that can match up against receivers and tight ends, but also come up and play the run. And then, we had to bid adieu to Eddie Jackson, who was here forever, but that's really the only hole in the defensive backfield right now. You can always use more depth, but they've got a deep secondary. They've got a really good secondary. And I think if they can, find some value in the draft and the cornerback position, maybe some special teams guys or some diamonds in the rough, and then try to find a replacement for Eddie Jackson, they could have one of the top units in the entire league.
I agree. I mean, it has me really excited. Look, I get it that there's so many Bears podcasts out there that'll just say the most homer thing possible because it's fun to say at the time. But the Bears defensive backfield right now looks legitimately strong. And it's incredibly underrated because people catch on to corners generally 1 year, if not 2 years late, as opposed to
Yes.
in the moment. And so when you get guys like Kyler, Tyreek, and Jalen all playing well at the same time, you're going to see the defensive line get the credit for it, right?
Right,
You're gonna see
right,
the linebackers get the credit for it.
right, right.
And then finally, we'll give the corners some credit. But to address the elephant in the room before we do start talking a little bit more about the roster and then digging into some of these draft picks, Matt Eberflus said in a press conference just the other day, the same phrase that I have caught myself parroting over the last 2 years. You can never have too many good DBs. And so, yes, this conversation we're about to have absolutely matters because with Jalen Johnson's contract status somewhat uncertain, with Tyreek Stevenson and Jalen Johnson, if memory serves, having missed some time,
Yes.
you always need that extra DB. And while Terrell Smith looked perfectly serviceable in his action, part of me wonders, look, we're going to have this conversation about a separate prospect later here, Nick, but part of me wonders whether the Bears see his future at corner or whether they saw enough scary moments of long speed and side to side breaking
Yes.
ability in Terrell's film that they might actually want to move him to safety. But who's to say
Yeah,
what complex conversations you'll have in an NFL locker room?
it's a great point. And I think Eberflus started the year, everybody expected him to run that cover two that he so famous
Mhm.
for in Indy, and then he kind of switched to a more cover three look
Yes.
against Washington. So that adjusts the type of player you're going to look for, especially at the safety position, but also at the cornerback position. And injuries are a big one. Jalen Johnson, as far as I know, has never played a full season. He might have played one season under Matt Nagy without missing time, but I think he might have missed time for one game just for a coach's decision and not due to injury. But Jaquan Brisker seems to live in the medical tent. So it's definitely a position that seems to have a high variance for injury. So you always want to have depth. And there's a lot of guys in this secondary class that are great developmental pieces on top of, being solid starters that you can throw in pretty early on and get decent results if you put them in a proper scheme and give them good coaching.
Oh yeah. I mean, leave it to the offensive and while I understand want to address this quickly because barely Usmo, you're right that Terrell Smith ran faster than Tyreek Stevenson, but at least what I see on his game film is that when he's not running directly with somebody, so straight backwards, those inside breakers, things like digs, things like slants, guys are separating from Terrell pretty quickly. That's what I saw. Maybe that'll clean up as he gets a little bit more physical and learns to balance that jam at that very, very top of a route with making sure that he's running with guys, all that balance that you learn as a rookie. But that's something that I know I saw all the way from Washington to the very end of the season, where then Green Bay just hit him with in breakers, in breakers, in breakers,
Right.
and seemed like they were separating up until the point where he unfortunately got hurt and left the field.
Mhm.
I like Terrell Smith. I also don't know about you, Nick. I tend to believe that rookies in the NFL, especially at corner, if you get anything positive from them, that's a positive
Yeah. Yeah.
because rookie corners, ooh, they've got just as about a bad a transition as rookie offensive tackles do, which
Yeah.
is to say you are thrown into the fire and
Yes.
anything you do right is
It's
generally evidence of
Yeah,
some talent.
it's not like college where you can have a bad game and then there's a cupcake afterwards that you can get right. I mean, the NFL, if you have a weakness, the next guy's going to exploit it, and the next guy after that's going to exploit it. So that's one thing about Tyreek Stevenson was his wherewithal last year to kind of take his lumps early and then develop into a solid cornerback. That's something that I think this staff really looks for when they're scouting these guys is who's who's been a guy that's taken some hits in the college level, maybe gotten targeted a few times, but then came back and gave a big stop for his teams.